So the theme of this week has been perspective. And on Monday, I did a podcast episode about this concept, and I talked about how I had originally intended to, when I laid out the months for the themes of the week. I laid out, okay, what I would do throughout the year. And each month of the year has numerous things that go on in that month. And so, for instance, this month, well, you're getting this now in March, but the previous month, February, was Black History Month. This month is Irish American Heritage Month, I think Women's History Month. I mean, each of the months have various things, various months associated with them, I guess is the way to put it. Yeah, check it out. Just do a Google search on that. It's fascinating. There are some things in there that you'll be like, whoa, that's kind of wild. But I didn't want to get through February without at least acknowledging, recognizing, and honoring Black History Month. But one of the main reasons I wanted to do that was to also talk about the perspective that it has created. And that's that, at least for me, I'm glad that we have these types of months with Black history or women's history or whatever type of history. I'm glad that we're recognizing and honoring, these different people, who deserve to be recognized and honored. And at the same time, I find it sad that we have to do that, because shouldn't they all be recognized and honored in our history anyway? Wouldn't that be the right thing to do? And yet, for so long, too many people in our country, of course, I'm talking about the United States here, too many people have been marginalized. Too many people have been not recognized properly. And now, and I mentioned this in the podcast, with the argument and the fight in America over so many different issues. The big ones right now, it feels like, are critical race theory teaching in higher education, and then the whole LGBTQ community and transgender community and how they're being treated. And these are topics, and I'm not a political, I don't do much in the way of politics in my posts and in these videos. And so I try to keep them out of it, and yet I'm a human being, and we all have our biases. We all have things that we lean in certain ways toward. So I try to, I don't want that to be the focus. Yet, how can we not at least have those types of topics get touched on? And so this is why, when I saw, when I'm looking at the various things in different months, I thought, well, I'd like to spend, at least one episode, if you will, of the podcast, of these videos, and of my blog post, where I might touch on something for that month. And so that's why I thought, well, I'll touch on some things for this month of February that might offer some perspective on the idea of perspective. And part of the reason for that too was I originally had wanted to also say something for that last week about the concept of a light at the end of the tunnel. At the end of January, I wrote about being stuck in a rut. And now at the end, well, the rut that I was speaking of, I was talking a lot to you winter sport coaches, and how, but anybody in the winter, it's like, especially those in northern climates, oh my gosh, we're still in this rut. It's cold, it's snowy, it's whatever. And I don't see the light at the end of the tunnel. I don't see the springtime coming, that soon from now. And then in those of us who are winter sport coaches, and we're still in our season, and especially if it's a tough year, it's a tough time. We don't see our postseason tournaments, being around the corner yet. Well, now they either are, or they just have happened for you. Okay. And so there's kind of that, there's a freshness to it. And all of a sudden the days are getting a little bit longer. We're getting light a little bit longer. I think daylight savings changes like in 2 weeks, might even be a week and a half now, from when you're getting this. So my point was that I wanted to do something about those concepts and about the perspective that we have and how we see the world. Okay, and how your perspective on something is going to be different than my perspective. It might be similar, but we're going to each have our own perspectives on things. And so I did a variety of quotes in the podcast episode, great quotes for coaches this past Monday, because that talked about this concept of perspective. And I'm going to read a couple of them here because I think they're really telling in terms of what I've been getting at, what I'm trying to get at here. This might seem like I'm rambling a bit, but I've written about perspective before, and I think it's really important because a lot of people just want to say how a certain thing is without considering the perspective from which it came. And also understanding that even whatever perspective it came from, my own perspective is going to color the way I see whatever that thing is. And this first quote is a perfect example. This is from John Lubbock. He was an English banker, politician, philanthropist in the 1800s. And he said, what we see depends mainly on what we look for. That's perspective. You and I could be sitting side by side watching something, and I could see it differently than you. I will read something on Twitter. I get sucked down into Twitter so much, and it's so stupid of me. I will read something on Twitter. I'll see something on the news and go, oh, yeah, I see that. And I'll change the channel, or I'll scroll down into the comments and see totally different perspective on the exact same thing. I watch Colin Cowherd. I've talked about that before. Listen to him on the radio, and I'll think, oh, that's a really good point. And then all of a sudden, I'll see people commenting like on Twitter, or I'll hear comments about him, and I'm like, they're seeing it totally differently. It's a perspective thing. Here's another one: Pedro Calderón de la Barca, Spanish dramatist, poet, and he said, this is probably in a play because it was written in verse. He said, in this treacherous world, nothing is the truth nor a lie. Everything depends on the color of the crystal through which one sees it. There it is, the perspective. Stephen Covey said, we must look at the lens through which we see the world as well as the world we see, and that the lens itself shapes how we interpret the world. So we're going to look out at the world, but we also have to look at how do we view it. That too is shaping it. It's not just itself the way it is. It's also the way we see it. That plays a huge role. Sterling K. Brown, an American actor, African-American actor, by the way. I hadn't mentioned that in the post. And so, getting the voice of somebody during, Black History Month who has a great point here. He says, empathy begins with understanding life from another person's perspective. Nobody has an objective experience of reality. It's all through our own individual prisms. I wanted that one to follow the one that was up above, the lens one, and then the one above the color of the crystal through which we see it. Okay, so I had kind of a pattern going through with these. Another actor, Chris Pine, said the only thing you sometimes have control over is perspective. You don't have control over your situation, but you have a choice about how you view it. George Eliot, it's a narrow mind which cannot look at a subject from various points of view. I love that because it speaks right to what I was talking about earlier, like with critical race theory or with the transgender issues and that. We've got to look at things from different perspectives. Yeah, I have my own feelings on these things, but we need to all look at the different ways that these things can take place and the different views of them. Dr. Wayne Dyer was somebody I always enjoyed watching his shows on PBS. I think my wife and I ordered one of his books or a DVD that he'd done. Loving people live in a loving world. Hostile people live in a hostile world. Same world. And I thought, that's so good. Yes, we're in that exact same world, but the way loving people are, they view it in a loving way. The way hostile people are, they view it in a hostile way. So anyway, those were a few of them. I had a couple more. Harvey Mackay and Martha Washington ended those. But the point was that we create our world through our perspective, how we view it. And so when you are focused on how bad things are, when you're focused on how, oh my gosh, this isn't going right, blah, blah, think about how are you viewing that? Fix it, change your view, and you can change your world. It's all a matter of perspective. Love the concept. I think it's something really important. And for those of us who are coaches, we need this ourselves when working with our kids to understand that our perspective is going to be different from theirs. And so we want to open our minds to better help for us to better understand them and help them. But also, it's something to teach our kids about perspective, that they view the world through their own prism. Sometimes it's a very narrow focused prism and it's all about them. And it's important for us to try and help them open up and see the world in a bigger way, as a bigger place with a much greater perspective. All right? All right. Next week, I'm going to take this the next step further and talk about our future self and how do we create our future and our future self. Come back next week for that. We'll talk to you then.